Fantasyomatic, who's joining us on the phone. He runs www.fantasyomatic.com. You can always hit him up on Twitter at Fantasyomatic, just like it sounds, FANTASYOMATIC. He'll answer your lineup questions there. But the reason we want to have him on tonight is we want to talk about, and for those of you who don't know, he built a huge algorithm over the summer. Don't even want to guess at how many man-hours and spreadsheets it took him to do this, but it is all in place now. It has all the data of the 2011 season, and it takes into account several key factors in trying to help you develop your best fantasy matchups. And we wanted to get him on the line tonight and talk about a couple of players at each position that he likes, and then maybe a couple that he would avoid. So we're going to get through this kind of somewhat rapid fire because we are limited in the time department. So Fantasyomatic will start with quarterbacks, and we'll get Joe and I thoughts on it. Who's one of the quarterbacks that the system is really liking coming into Week 15 for people?
Well, I'll start off with the real easy one. To be honest with you, Rex Grossman was actually one that we kind of liked if you're really actually desperate, like in that Ben Roethlisberger situation. A guy that's a little bit more of an obvious pick, but I kind of like these numbers, and I want people to get excited about his start this week, is Tony Romo. The guy's been on fire, averaging 20 points a game over his last 6. He's not really a consideration for a sit or anything, but it's really about Tampa Bay's defense. On the year, they've, over the season, they're 17th easiest defense against fantasy quarterbacks, but in particular, over the last 4 weeks, they're the 5th easiest, giving up an average of about 20 a game to opposing quarterbacks. The Bucs do get back Aqib Talib this week, which is a big deal because he was out last week and helped him get gashed. But I really do like Romo and that entire passing game on a very special Saturday night presentation of football just in time for our fantasy playoffs. So pretty obvious one there, but if you've got him on your squad, don't think twice about him. Don't get fancy. If you're going up against them, maybe start to sweat it a little bit.
All right, everybody probably loves Romo. No beef for you there. Joe was going with Romo. Obviously a good matchup this weekend.
Insanely good. Well, not insanely good, but still, I mean, Dallas, they've got so many weapons. There's no way I could. It would pain me to bench Tony Romo.
All right, well, since we already talked about the fact that you like Sexy Rexy, let's get into some running backs. Who are a couple of running backs that the algorithm likes this weekend?
Well, listen, everybody scrambled to the waivers this week to pick up one big running back, and you know who I'm talking about, Felix Jones, and you put him right into your lineup this week, no question about it. Not only did he have some good production in what we saw last week, but more importantly, Dallas has been extremely hot on offense. I just talked about Tony Romo, but they've got fullback Tony Flametta back, and that's actually huge for the running game. This is unfortunate for DeMarco Murray owners that they couldn't take advantage of his return. Because while Flametta was out, Dallas was just averaging 3.4 yards per carry, but when he's in there, they're averaging 8 yards per carry. So it's a pretty big deal that he's back. And Tampa Bay, again, sorry to harp on Tampa Bay back-to-back here, but it's the easiest matchup for fantasy running backs, allowing 24 points combined to fantasy running backs on the other side. In their last 4 games, getting gashed by guys like MJD. Both of the Carolina running backs scored big, and even CJ had his big resurgence against Tampa Bay. So Felix Jones is a guy that not only do you throw in there this week, but you're going to keep him in the lineup because you will win. And he's got Philadelphia Eagles in Week 16, so a little bit of a planning ahead. So good job if anybody picked him up off of waivers.
All right, you're not going to hear any beef from me. I thought Dallas was going to be one of the most explosive offenses in the preseason. That hasn't really worked out exactly that way, but they've still been playing pretty darn good, and I don't think anybody that picked up Laurent Robinson a few weeks ago is complaining about the production they got for him while Miles Austin was out. So we'll move on from the Cowboys. Who's another running back the algorithm likes?
Actually, Reggie Bush, another one. It might seem kind of obvious just because he's been, plowing through and really having a resurgence. He's a guy that probably got dumped in a lot of leagues. If you're lucky enough to pick him up, and if you have a spot for him as an RB2, Reggie's coming, really out of nowhere for a lot of owners. But he's really done a really good job with a lot of these 10-plus yard gains. He's getting goal line looks, and he's making use of them. He looked really comfortable running inside behind Mike Pouncey last week, so that was always something encouraging. You do want to watch the status of Jake Long this week, which is the big news in Miami. But Bush is on track for another solid matchup in Week 15 against Buffalo, who in the last month is the second easiest matchup for fantasy running backs, allowing 24 combined points per game to opposing fantasy runners. And Reggie also faced Buffalo in Week 11, and he got himself a pretty modest 12 fantasy points. But you got to like him as an RB2, or if you're lucky enough to be able to slide him in as a flex, you're going to like what you see out of Reggie this weekend.
All right, Joe, your thoughts on Reggie Bush? I've seen the chat, you talking about Reggie Bush been killing it. I'm assuming you're liking that pick again, him going up against the what had happened Buffalo Bills. Did we lose Joe?
Sorry about that.
All right, that's all right. No problem.
I muted myself for the convenience of listeners, so know that I had your best interests at heart. Bottom line, though, I'm pretty encouraged by this. I mean, not only is it, I've got my own beliefs, of course, but Fantasyomatic's knowledge now endorsing my Reggie Bush pick. I mean, not only has he been well worth it the last couple of weeks, but really it's kind of an indictment on the Miami Dolphins GM at this point. I mean, do you know what you're doing, really? Because Daniel Thomas has been a bust. Reggie Bush, I mean, as long as he stays healthy, yes, you've got to start him. And, yeah, this makes me feel a lot better heading into weeks 15 and 16.
All right, so we'll move on to wide receivers, and I got to admit, I have been starting the wrong wide receiver every week, leaving guys like Early Doucette on my bench, leaving guys like Jabbar Gaffney on my bench, and these are two guys that I think have to be probably top 20, top 25 receivers at this point. Jabbar Gaffney seems, especially in PPR, every week seems to be putting up points. Tell me some good wide receivers this week, Omatic, because I'm telling you it's one point of contention for me the last few weeks.
Well, I'm going to see your Jabbar Gaffney and almost kind of echo that statement when I talk about Santana Moss. Moss has actually led Washington in targets since he's gotten back from his hand injury, which was just a couple weeks ago. And, of course, Fred Davis is out of the lineup, who had been leading the team in targets prior to that. And Moss certainly looks like he's been the beneficiary. He caught 3 balls for 81 yards and a touchdown last week versus the Patriots, who are, a very easy start for fantasy wide receivers. But you might, if you didn't watch the game, you might have missed out on the fact that he also missed out on a 27-yard touchdown to add to those totals, but that got called back due to a penalty. So he could have had a real monster game and still had a very reasonable game for a wide receiver too if you plugged him in there. The Washington wide receivers have the best fantasy playoff schedule by far of all wide receivers according to the Omatic. And that includes this weekend's matchup against the Giants, who have been the easiest matchup for fantasy wide receivers in the last month, allowing a combined 36 points a game and double digits. Check this stat out. They've given up double-digit fantasy points to every single wide receiver they've faced. I'm talking wide receiver 1s, wide receiver 2s, even a couple slot guys, all in the last month. Now, of course, some of those teams that they've faced are some powerhouse passing teams, but I like the idea that, like we mentioned before, Rexy's going to have to throw to stay in this one. And I think that Santana Moss and even your boy Gaffney are going to be beneficiaries. I'd feel pretty comfortable. As a matter of fact, in one of my big money leagues, I'm starting Santana Moss as a flex, and I feel really comfortable about that this week.
Well, before we move on to a few players that you don't like, I want to get your thoughts on a question in the chat from a good friend of the program, Walkie33. He says he's in a PPR league this week, and he already is starting Halou and Felix. Does he sit Michael Bush over Reggie Bush for his flex? I said I might do that just given the fact that Buffalo is so bad, but the more I think about it, maybe Halou is the guy that you want to bench, put both Bushes in there and Felix. So I guess if we're asking you, Omatic, to pick 3, who would you be looking at there? Halou, Reggie Bush, Michael Bush, and why this stupid thing keeps scrolling, driving me crazy here. Sorry, Halou, Felix Jones, Michael Bush, and Reggie Bush. Which 3 are you picking out of those 4?
Well, the algorithm ranks him actually Reggie a clear in first because he's got the second easiest matchup and some production to actually feed into that. Number 2 actually is Michael Bush against Detroit. Detroit is the number 10 easiest matchup in the last month for fantasy running backs, and they've given up, let's put it this way, they gave up 17 fantasy points to Toby Gerhart last week, Darren Sproles, Mark Ingram, all these guys, Jonathan Stewart, D'Angelo Williams, all these guys scored 11 fantasy points or more in the last month. And, of course, you do have to take into account to some degree 2 of those games in the last month were without Sue, and he is going to be back this week. And Halou going against the Giants, let's put it this way, we've got Michael Bush ranked at number 10 this week, and Halou is ranked number 13. It does indicate that, yeah, you got a tough choice to make right there. But probably different than what the individual in the chat thought, just simply because they were thinking that Halou is the obvious start. I'm thinking Halou's the guy who would be in question. I'm with you on that one, Jared.
Joe, you agree or disagree with my logic that Halou maybe is the guy that you sit out?
Totally disagree with you guys. There's a bottom line that comes down to what happens between you enter in those white painted lines. Halou is going to snip the end zone. He's going to get 100 yards, and he's going to get a ton of passes thrown his way. We know this. I don't care who the opponent is. I don't care if they're playing the Steelers, they're playing the Ravens, or the Browns. Halou is just going to get all these freaking touches. So that's why I think I'm siding with him in so many of these start sit-em questions. I mean, he'd be the least likely of these guys that I'd want to bench just because he's been so effective. And just to put it out for the listeners once again, he did this, folks, without his starting left tackle and his starting right tackle. Okay, Trent Williams suspended, Jamal Brown injured last week's game. Maybe Brown comes back, maybe he doesn't. Maybe I don't care